Flight attendant denies water to passenger from billionaire family, not knowing they own the airline. A flight attendant turned down a glass of water for a quiet man in first class, completely unaware of his true identity or the extraordinary events that awaited them upon landing. Before we dive into this tale, please share where you're tuning in from today. And if you find joy in stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The airport was alive with energy, a constant buzz that never seemed to fade. Rolling suitcases, loudspeaker announcements, and the hurried shuffle of impatient footsteps. Amidst this whirlwind, a family of four navigated through the chaos. As they moved gracefully through the crowd, James Carter, the father, donned a fitted black suit, every inch of it pristine and unwrinkled. His expression remained calm and serious, betraying nothing of the emotions swirling within. Beside him, his wife Eleanor exuded warmth in her soft beige coat, her dark brown leather handbag cradled in her arm. She held tightly to the hand of their daughter Sophie Carter, while their son Ethan Carter trailed just behind, tugging along a small all-silver suitcase. There was an understated elegance about them. No flashy logos, no boisterous voices, no sense of urgency, but still people instinctively parted to let them pass. It was the way James Carter carried himself, the quiet strength in Eleanor, that commanded respect and attention. She moved with an air of confidence, as if waiting in lines or facing questions were foreign concepts to her, as if she truly belonged wherever she went. Upon reaching the first-class gate, the airline worker barely glanced at their tickets, his disinterest palpable. "Enjoy your flight," he mumbled, his eyes scanning each one. James Carter responded with a courteous nod, while Eleanor offered a gentle smile, and the children quietly followed their parents through the gate, their silence speaking volumes. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin was already buzzing with life, the air rich with the scent of new leather. Warm lighting danced off the polished surfaces, creating an inviting atmosphere that wrapped around them like a soft embrace. The music softly filled the air as James Carter claimed the window seat, Eleanor settling in beside him. Across the aisle, Leah and Ethan Carter nestled into their own seats, their silence punctuated only by fleeting glances and the occasional nod. The family exuded a calm familiarity, as if this journey was just another chapter in their well-worn story. Sarah Mitchell, the senior flight attendant, glided through the aisle with practiced precision, her navy blue uniform sharp and immaculate. Her blonde hair was pulled back flawlessly, and though her smile was bright, it seemed to lack the warmth of genuine joy, hinting at the weight of her duties. She cast a fleeting glance at each passenger, ensuring seatbelts were fastened, offering polite but somewhat strained greetings. When her gaze landed on James Carter's family, her smile faltered for just a heartbeat. Her eyes roamed over their composed, neatly dressed figures before narrowing ever so slightly. Without uttering a word, she offered a brief nod and continued on her way. It wasn't long before someone seated behind James Carter's row requested water, a middle-aged man in a suit, clearly a seasoned traveler. Sarah Mitchell's face lit up with a warm smile as she responded, "Of course, sir. Sparkling or still?" Moments later, she returned with a bottle of glass and a cloth napkin. Moments later, Sophie Carter's gaze drifted across the aisle towards Sarah Mitchell, who had just brushed past them. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice tinged with hope. "Can I please have a bottle of water?" But Sarah Mitchell didn't even pause, her tone flat as she replied, "We'll serve drinks after takeoff, sweetie," before walking away without a backward glance. Sophie Carter's heart sank as she glanced at her mother, Eleanor, who gently placed her hand on Sophie Carter's arm, offering a soft smile that spoke volumes without words. Ethan Carter shifted slightly in his seat, his eyes following Sarah Mitchell as she moved up the aisle, completely oblivious to their presence, leaving a lingering sense of disappointment in the air. Minutes ticked by as Eleanor pressed the call button, her heart racing with anticipation. Sarah Mitchell returned her smile, though it felt more strained now. "Yes?" Eleanor spoke with the same calm tone she had used at the gate, but inside she felt a flicker of anxiety. "It's a bit warm in here. May I please have a small bottle of water for my children?" Sarah Mitchell leaned in closer, her voice dropping, but her sharpness unwavering. "As I mentioned, we'll be serving drinks after takeoff. I'll have to ask for your patience." There was no warmth in her tone, only a sense of control that felt almost oppressive, not quite rude, but certainly lacking in respect. Eleanor nodded slightly, her gaze drifting away, feeling the weight of the moment. Sarah Mitchell turned and walked off, leaving Eleanor with a mix of frustration and concern. He walked away, oblivious to the piercing glance James Carter cast at his wife, or the way his hand hesitated before reaching for his phone. With urgency, he typed a quick message and set the device face down on the armrest. The cabin lights dimmed, creating a hushed atmosphere as the last passengers found their seats. The door sealed shut, and the plane began its slow retreat from the gate. Everyone settled into their seats, the seatbelt sign illuminated, and the safety video flickered to life. Yet an unspoken tension hung in the air, and what Sarah Mitchell remained unaware of, what she could never have fathomed, was that the gravest blunder of her entire career had just unfolded. The engines roared softly as the plane started its journey toward the runway. Sarah Mitchell moved through the cabin, checking tray tables and seatbelts, donning that familiar professional facade she had maintained for years. Yet her thoughts wandered back to the family. There was something unsettling about them. They hadn't been loud or disruptive, but there was a quiet confidence that sent a shiver down her spine, particularly from the mother. Too calm, too composed. And the father, he hadn't uttered a single word since boarding, just sat there with that inscrutable expression, as if he were hiding something deep within. Sarah Mitchell had a sinking feeling about how this flight would unfold. As she passed their row once more, she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. Eleanor, the mother, was gently helping Sophie Carter adjust her seatbelt, while Ethan Carter was lost in his own world, staring out the window. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, yet a wave of annoyance washed over Sarah Mitchell. Perhaps it was the way they appeared unfazed by their first-class seats, or the calm, almost entitled way they requested water, as if it were their right to receive it without question. Sarah Mitchell had encountered this type before. People who believed that wealth equated to a sense of superiority, as if manners were an afterthought. Just as the wheels lifted off the ground, her irritation simmered beneath the surface. The aircraft ascended gracefully into the vast blue, a gentle chime resonating through the cabin as the seatbelt sign flickered off. Sarah Mitchell stood by the galley, pouring water into glasses for the eager passengers in the front row. Lauren Hayes, another attendant, joined her, sorting through snacks with a friendly offer. "Do you want me to handle the second row?" she asked. But Sarah Mitchell, with a determined shake of her head, replied, "I've got it." With care, she navigated the aisle, balancing a tray filled with glasses. The man in seat 2A beamed at her as she handed him his drink, and she returned his smile with her warmest customer service expression before moving on to the next passenger. Seat, but as she approached Ethan Carter and Sophie Carter, she hesitated, her gaze lingering on them for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then with a heavy heart, she bypassed their row completely. Leah blinked, her voice trembling slightly as she repeated, "Excuse me, may I have some water now?" Sarah Mitchell continued her stride, her response sharp and dismissive. "I'll come back to you," her focus already shifting to the next passenger. Yet she never returned. James Carter observed the scene in silence, his expression unwavering, but his phone buzzed softly on the armrest. He stole a glance, nodded faintly, and turned the screen face down again. Lauren Hayes noticed the tension in the air. In the galley, she leaned closer to Sarah Mitchell, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hey, did you skip the kids on purpose?" Sarah Mitchell frowned, her irritation palpable. "They're not kids, and I didn't skip anyone. They can wait." Chloe remained silent, but her gaze lingered on Sarah Mitchell, filled with uncertainty and a hint of discomfort. Meanwhile, at the family seats, Eleanor leaned toward James Carter, her voice a hushed whisper. "That's the third time," she said, her concern evident. James Carter didn't reply. Instead, he picked up his phone, typed a brief message, and then set it aside. Up in the cockpit, the captain's radio crackled to life, breaking the tension in the air. The co-pilot leaned in, his eyes widening as he read the incoming message. "Sir," he said, glancing at the captain, "we just received a direct alert from King Aviation." The captain straightened, a sense of urgency washing over him. "What kind of alert?" he asked, his heart racing. The co-pilot met his gaze, the weight of the news heavy between them. "The founder is on board, seated in 1A. Special protocol flagged. Immediate attention required." The captain froze for a moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in before he reached for the intercom button. Meanwhile, in first class, Sarah Mitchell continued pouring drinks, blissfully unaware that the quiet man she had overlooked was no ordinary passenger, and that her world was about to change. Choices had already begun to conspire against her. The captain emerged from the cockpit, his silence heavy as he smoothed down his uniform jacket, striding purposefully into the first-class cabin. His unexpected presence drew the gaze of several passengers. Heads turned, conversations came to a halt, and even Sarah Mitchell found herself momentarily frozen as he approached her. He held his tongue for a moment, his eyes sweeping over the rows until they finally settled on James Carter, the man in the first seat, the one who had remained utterly silent throughout this ordeal. Approached slowly, responding with a calm demeanor. "Sir," he said, his voice steady, "is everything all right?" James Carter looked up, his voice quiet yet clear. "Not yet," he replied, "but it will be." The captain gave a small nod and stepped back, that simple gesture providing all the reassurance he needed. He returned to the cockpit, leaving Sarah Mitchell frozen in place. She had never witnessed the captain enter the cabin for a passenger unless something truly serious was unfolding. Her heart raced as she turned toward the galley, a tightening sensation in her chest. Lauren Hayes observed her with a puzzled expression. "What's going on?" Lauren Hayes asked, concern lacing her voice. Sarah Mitchell felt a heavy weight in her chest as she forced herself to shrug and say, "I don't know," even though deep down she was painfully aware of the truth. Something was undeniably off, the way the captain's gaze lingered on that man, the familiarity in his voice as he spoke to him, as if they shared a secret that Sarah Mitchell was not privy to. She tried to dismiss it, convincing herself that perhaps he was just a high-level executive, or that it was all just a coincidence. Yet as she turned back to the drink cart, her hands trembled uncontrollably, a surge of anxiety coursing through her. She couldn't quite grasp why, but James Carter's unsettling silence loomed over her, more terrifying than any irate passenger could ever be. Meanwhile, James Carter remained seated, exuding an eerie calmness that only deepened her unease. Eleanor leaned in, sensing the tension in the air. "Done," he nodded yes. Leah glanced at them, her heart racing. "What did you do?" James Carter looked at his daughter, his expression serious, and said, "Sometimes when people don't see you, you remind them who you are." The rest of the cabin remained oblivious to the tension brewing, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The air felt thick and charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Some passengers began to notice Sarah Mitchell's anxious movements, the way her eyes darted nervously to the front of the plane. With a trembling hand, Sarah Mitchell picked up the intercom phone, her voice barely steady as she dialed into the cockpit. "Captain, is there something going on I should be—" She felt a chill as silence lingered on the line, and then the captain's voice cut through the stillness, cold and unyielding. "Yes, Miss Fields, you'll be informed shortly." Click. The receiver slipped from her grasp, and a wave of dread washed over her, settling heavily in her chest. Something was terribly wrong, and the worst part was that it had already begun. Sarah Mitchell fought to steady her breath as she placed the intercom phone back, her palms clammy and her usual confidence beginning to wane. Turning back toward the aisle, she caught Lauren Hayes' gaze, the weight of unspoken concern hanging between them. "All right," Lauren Hayes whispered, her voice barely audible. Sarah Mitchell managed a strained smile, but deep down she was anything but tired. She was shaken. The image of the captain's intense gaze directed at that man, the very same man she had dismissed time and again, haunted her thoughts. Now here was the captain, stepping out mid-flight, treating him like some high-ranking official. It left a bitter taste in her mouth. Sarah Mitchell despised feeling sidelined, especially when it concerned her cabin. She made her way down the aisle once more, feigning concern for the passengers, but her true focus was on that unsettling exchange. In James Carter's row, the entire family exuded a calmness that felt almost unsettling. Not smug, not angry, just a steady presence that seemed to amplify the tension. As she walked by, Ethan Carter stole a glance at her, then quickly looked away. The silence between them spoke volumes, louder than any words he could have uttered. She retreated to the galley where Lauren Hayes was busy organizing snack trays. "I think he's someone important," Lauren Hayes suddenly declared. Sarah Mitchell turned, intrigued. "Who? The man in 1A? The father?" Sarah Mitchell rolled her eyes, dismissing the notion. "A lot of people think they're important in first class." "No," Lauren Hayes insisted, shaking her head with conviction. "This is different. The captain's—" Something felt off. He was acting so strangely, a side of him that was completely unfamiliar. Did you notice how eerily calm that man was? It was as if he was fully aware of the chaos around him. Sarah Mitchell remained silent, but deep down she felt the weight of Chloe's words. She knew the truth. Suddenly the cockpit door swung open once more, and this time it was the co-pilot who emerged. He strode directly to the galley, his demeanor unreadable, and handed Sarah Mitchell a folded piece of paper. Confusion washed over her. "What's this?" she asked, her heart racing as she unfolded it quickly. The note was brief, just a few lines, but its implications were heavy. "Miss Fields is to be removed from active service for the remainder of this flight if, effective immediately, you are to take the rear jump seat and have no contact with passengers or operations control, per instruction of the CA Executive Office." Sarah Mitchell's heart sank, a wave of confusion washing over her. What is happening? Who could have sent this? The co-pilot remained stoic, his expression unchanging. It came directly from the executive office, and that was all he could say. Sarah Mitchell turned to him, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You're grounding me mid-flight for what?" He simply nodded once, then turned to leave. Chloe stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock. Sarah Mitchell. But Sarah Mitchell was lost in her own turmoil, her ears ringing with the weight of the moment. The phone rang incessantly as she stared down at the paper, her heart racing as she read it over and over. This had to be a mistake. She had followed every protocol, had done her job diligently, hadn't she? But the message was unmistakable. She was no longer in charge. And whoever this family was, they were not just passengers. They were the catalyst for her world about to shatter. Sarah Mitchell stood frozen in the narrow galley, the paper trembling in her grasp. Her stomach churned with dread, and her chest felt like it was being squeezed tight. This couldn't be real. In all her years with the airline, she had never faced such a devastating blow. Mid-flight, she felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on her. She had dedicated herself to training junior staff, expertly leading them through difficult flights and handling emergencies with grace. She was a respected figure, someone people looked up to and followed without question. And now, without any warning or explanation, just a cold, printed note, she found herself being quietly pushed out. Turning to Lauren Hayes, her voice trembled with a mix of disbelief and anger. "This has to be a mistake." But Lauren Hayes's eyes were clouded with doubt. "Sarah Mitchell, that order came from corporate." Stepping closer, Sarah Mitchell whispered urgently, "For what? For not bringing water right away? I didn't scream at anyone. I didn't insult anyone. I followed standard procedure." "Treat them just like everyone else," Chloe replied, choosing her words with caution. "You know they were the only ones who asked before we took off." Sarah Mitchell snapped back. "Do you really think this is just about water?" Lauren Hayes hesitated, her gaze drifting away. Sarah Mitchell's jaw tightened. "No, it's something deeper. They must know someone. They must be—" Her voice trailed off as the realization struck her like a blow to the stomach. Slowly she turned her head and looked toward James Carter, who sat there calm and composed, one hand resting on the armrest while the other rhythmically tapped on his phone. Eleanor was lost in her book. Something on a tablet captured the children's attention as they watched a movie in serene silence, headphones snugly in place. Not a single voice was raised, not a hint of chaos emerged from them, and yet their quietude seemed to create a weightier disruption than any shouting passenger could muster. Sarah Mitchell felt the atmosphere grow thick with unease as she made her way back to the front of the cabin. The passengers were starting to sense the tension, noticing her abrupt absence from the aisle, her pause in serving drinks. A few curious glances were cast her way, and one man near the front leaned in to whisper. Something was exchanged between him and his wife, a subtle nod toward James Carter's row. As Sarah Mitchell approached the last row of first class, she hesitated beside James Carter, her heart racing. Lowering her voice in an attempt to maintain her composure, she said, "Sir, I believe there's been some confusion. If I said anything that came across—" James Carter met her gaze with a single, calm glance, quiet and completely unreadable. "No confusion," he replied, his voice steady. Sarah Mitchell felt a lump in her throat. "I wasn't aware of any special protocol regarding your family. If I had been notified earlier—" He raised a hand, not in anger, but just enough to halt her words. "The words you thought were insignificant," he said softly, struck her like a sudden blow, even though his voice remained calm. Eleanor kept her gaze fixed on the page, refusing to look up. Sarah Mitchell's hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. "I didn't mean any harm," she blurted out, desperation creeping into her voice. "I treat all passengers—" But he cut her off again, his tone steady yet piercing. "No, you treat passengers the way you believe they deserve to be treated." Though he didn't raise his voice, his words reverberated in the silence. Sarah Mitchell opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. Her throat felt parched, and her mind raced with turmoil. The moment felt like a whirlwind as James Carter swiftly turned his focus back to his phone. "You've been relieved of duty," he said with an unsettling calmness. "You should take your seat now." Sarah Mitchell's heart raced, a storm of emotions swirling within her. She glanced around, spotting Lauren Hayes standing further back, her gaze sharp and watchful. The other passengers had fallen into a tense silence, pretending to be absorbed in their own worlds. Yet every ear was tuned in, every eye was watching. And in that pivotal moment, for the very first time in her career, Sarah Mitchell Fields did something she had never dared to do before on a flight. She walked slowly past the passengers she once commanded, the very people she had corrected and controlled, feeling the weight of their eyes upon her, and made her way toward the back of the plane, not as the one in charge, but as the one who had just been unceremoniously dismissed. The aisle stretched out before her, feeling longer than ever, each step resonating with the haunting sound of her authority fading into the distance. Sarah Mitchell's shoes tapped softly against the cabin floor as she walked, her shoulders tense and her expression a mask of neutrality, but inside everything was crumbling. She passed row after row of silent passengers. Some glanced at her with a mix of curiosity and pity, while others openly stared, their gazes heavy and unyielding. Each step felt like a weight pressing down on her, amplifying the turmoil within. Last, like her uniform was a heavy burden, pressing into her skin as if it had become a part of someone else's life, and perhaps it had. She made her way to the back of the plane, where the crew jump seat was folded up near the galley. There, a junior flight attendant named Mia Patel was busy restocking cups and organizing snack trays. When she looked up and saw Sarah Mitchell, her expression froze in surprise. It was unusual for a senior to be back here mid-flight unless something serious was amiss. "Everything okay?" Mia Patel asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Sarah Mitchell managed a tight nod, a mere whisper of reassurance. "Just taking a break, but—" It wasn't just a break. She pulled down the jump seat and sat there, hands clasped tightly in her lap, desperately trying to maintain her composure as her thoughts spiraled out of control. Memories flashed through her mind, relentless and haunting. Layla's quiet voice pleading for water, Eleanor's calm yet piercing gaze, James Carter's heavy silence. Over and over, she replayed it all, clinging to the belief that she hadn't yelled, hadn't insulted anyone, hadn't even outright refused them water. But deep down, she understood the painful truth. It wasn't about the words she spoke. It was about the way she spoke them, the dismissiveness, the assumptions, the way she had treated them as if they were invisible, as if they didn't belong. She longed to change it all. She tried to convince herself it was just protocol, but that lie no longer brought her any comfort. Behind her, the relentless hum of the engines filled the air, a constant reminder of her disconnection. She found herself staring at the floor, feeling like a ghost in a place she no longer belonged. This was the domain of new hires and trainees, not someone like her, someone with years of dedicated service. Yet here she was, cast aside without warning, stripped of the chance to defend herself. Her hands curled tightly in her lap, a physical manifestation of her frustration. "They're punishing me for a misunderstanding," she thought bitterly. "This isn't fair." With a heavy heart, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, opening her crew app, searching for a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. A message was supposed to come, a clarification, an explanation of the chaos unfolding, but there was nothing. No alert, no word from the flight lead, no guidance from HR, just an oppressive silence. Then, as if the universe was mocking her, her screen flickered to life with an incoming email. Heart racing, she opened it in a frenzy. It was from the airline's internal operations desk, and one line pierced through the haze of uncertainty. Subject immediate action, logged incident, escalated to executive level. Sarah Mitchell's breath hitched in her throat. Executive level? That was beyond standard protocol, beyond normal. The gravity of an incident being escalated to such heights meant that someone powerful had taken notice. She stepped into a situation with someone who had no desire for an apology, someone who was indifferent to policies and excuses. Her gaze shot up, her heart racing wildly in her chest, her mouth feeling parched. Slowly, agonizingly, the harsh truth began to sink in. She hadn't merely been rude to a significant customer. She had disrespected the wrong family. Sarah Mitchell clenched her jaw, a surge of desperation flooding through her as she yearned to do something, anything to reverse the unfolding disaster. She stood up abruptly and made her way to the nearest jump seat phone, her hands trembling as she picked up the receiver and requested to be patched through. To the lead flight supervisor on the ground, her voice quivered with uncertainty, yet she fought to maintain her composure. After a heavy pause, the response came. Request denied. You are under observation and temporarily restricted from outbound contact until further notice. She gazed at the receiver in disbelief. This had never happened to her before. Her own airline had severed her connection mid-flight. With trembling legs, she returned to her seat, her stomach churning with a wave of panic. She had never felt so utterly powerless, not like this, never in the face of passenger disputes or junior staff errors. She had always been the one in control, but now she found herself unable to even reach out to her supervisor. Meanwhile, at the front of the plane, an unexpected stillness enveloped the cabin. James Carter reclined in his seat, his eyes gently closed for a fleeting moment of peace. Eleanor, with a serene focus, scrolled through her tablet, while Ethan Carter and Sophie Carter leaned in close, sharing whispers and earbuds, their connection palpable. The atmosphere around them had transformed. Fellow passengers exchanged small nods as they passed, their earlier silence now infused with a sense of cautious admiration. Lauren Hayes approached once more to offer drinks, her movements deliberate and slow. "Can I get anything for you?" she asked, her voice a gentle invitation. James Carter opened his eyes, and with a gentle refusal, he said, "No, thank you." Chloe hesitated, her voice softening as she added, "If there's anything you need, just let me know." Eleanor looked up, offering a small, polite smile, her eyes reflecting a sense of calm. "We're fine now," she reassured. Lauren Hayes nodded, but as she turned to walk away, she cast one last glance back at the rear of the plane where Sarah Mitchell sat alone. The plane cruised smoothly above the clouds, yet inside, Sarah Mitchell felt the turmoil brewing within her, a storm that was far from over and threatening to intensify. She sat stiffly in the crew jump seat at the back of the plane, her hands gripping the edges tightly, as if seeking solace in the familiar. She gripped the seat so tightly that her knuckles turned a ghostly white, her mind racing uncontrollably. She stared straight ahead, her gaze unfocused, thoughts spiraling in a chaotic whirlwind. "This can't be happening," she told herself for the 100th time. "It's just water. I didn't yell. I didn't break a rule." But the truth was creeping in, relentless, and no matter how fiercely she tried to push it away, it surged back, stronger than before. She hadn't merely overlooked a passenger, she had judged them, made assumptions, treated them as if they didn't belong. And now someone far more powerful than she was watching, looming over her with an undeniable presence. What she had anticipated was a sense of accountability. Yet as she glanced toward the front of the plane, a wave of isolation washed over her. From her seat, the curtain felt like a barrier, shutting her out and severing her connection to the crew. Mia Patel moved silently around the galley behind her, offering no words of comfort. She too had seen the email. Everyone had, once it circulated through the internal system. Each crew member on board was painfully aware that Sarah Mitchell had been relieved of her duties. No one dared to voice it. The heavy silence spoke volumes. Gripping her phone once more, Sarah Mitchell felt an urgent need to reach out. Desperation clawed at her as she searched for someone, anyone, to explain this overwhelming situation and help her. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through her contacts, pausing on the name of a former supervisor at headquarters. With a flicker of hope, she tapped the name, pressed the call button, and held the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice, and then a cold, robotic voice shattered her hopes. "The number you are trying to reach is currently unavailable." Heart sinking, she tried another number, only to face the same disheartening result. Another voicemail. Her chest tightened painfully. She couldn't wrap her mind around it. People who once answered her calls in an instant were now turning their backs on her. In a last-ditch effort, she reached out to a close friend from training school, someone she had once trusted deeply. For years, it felt like a connection, but now she spoke rapidly, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Something happened on my flight. I think there's been a misunderstanding." Yet the voice on the other end was cautious, distant. "Sarah Mitchell, I don't think I can talk right now." Confusion washed over her. "What? Why?" A long pause hung in the air, heavy with tension, before the voice returned, quietly. "You're trending on the crew forums." Sarah Mitchell's throat tightened, panic rising within her. "What are you talking about?" "There's a report, a passenger complaint. Someone said you denied service to the founder's family. The Kings." Sarah Mitchell blinked, her mind racing. "The who?" "The King family. James Carter King. He owns the airline." Time seemed to freeze around her, the weight of the moment crashing down like a tidal wave. In that fleeting moment, Sarah Mitchell's mouth opened, yet silence enveloped her as the voice continued, now gentler but piercing. "People are saying you denied his daughter water, that you turned away his wife, that you made them feel like they were invisible in first class." Panic surged within her as she stammered. "I didn't know who they were. I didn't mean anything by it. I was just following procedure." But her friend's response cut through her defenses. "You didn't need to know their names, Sarah Mitchell. You just had to treat them like everyone else." Desperation clawed at her as she attempted to defend herself, but the line had already gone dead. She sat there frozen, her gaze locked on the screen, feeling the weight of James Carter's absence like a heavy shroud around her. King, the James Carter King, a name that echoed in meetings and graced corporate newsletters. He was the founder and majority owner of the entire airline group, a billionaire businessman who had painstakingly built the company from the ground up. Known for his low profile and sharp memory, he was a figure of immense power. And now she realized with a sinking heart, she had just denied his wife and children something as fundamental as water. Her mouth felt parched, her tongue heavy with regret, and her hands trembled slightly as she set the phone down. The pieces were falling into place. The captain's sudden change in behavior, the direct order from in the executive office, the block calls echoed like a haunting reminder of the tension that had built up. The crew members had felt it too. She had crossed a line, completely unaware of the impact of her actions. It wasn't just the water incident, it was the way she spoke, the tone laced with assumptions, the quiet disrespect that lingered in the air. Now every mistake loomed over her like an impending storm. Passengers began to stir in the cabin once more. Some stood to stretch, while others whispered softly, their voices barely breaking the silence. Sarah Mitchell caught glimpses of their faces, their expressions a mix of confusion and judgment as they glanced back at her. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach, unsure of what they had heard or what had been recorded. But one thing was clear. The consequences were rushing back to her, swift and relentless. Stories have a way of taking flight, especially those filled with power and scandal. This was no longer just a tale. It was morphing into her own narrative, one being penned without her consent, and one she feared she might never have the chance to rewrite. The steady hum of the engines surrounded her. The cabin exuded calmness, yet Sarah Mitchell felt a storm brewing within. Her hands quivered in her lap, her eyes flickering to the front every few seconds, clinging to the hope for a sign. Anything to assure her that this wasn't the end, that she would be reinstated, that someone would approach her and reveal it was all just a misunderstanding. But no one came. No call from the cockpit, no message from operations, not even a whisper from the crew. She felt utterly invisible. That realization struck her the hardest. Mia Patel continued to prepare the coffee service in silence, but her fleeting glances towards Sarah Mitchell spoke volumes. Unease, caution, and a flicker of sympathy that offered no comfort, only a sharp sting. Sarah Mitchell remained frozen, desperately trying to replay the events from the start, clinging to the hope that maybe she could explain it all away. Perhaps she could say she was distracted, overworked, or somehow convince someone that it was all just a misunderstanding. Had nothing to do with bias or attitude or ego, but even she could feel that excuse crumbling within her. When she truly reflected on that initial moment, Sophie Carter's simple request for water, Eleanor's polite demeanor, James Carter's calm silence, she couldn't escape the truth. Deep down, she recognized that she hadn't adhered to protocol. She had been judging them. They had been respectful, composed, and had followed every rule. Yet something dark and insidious within her had whispered that they didn't belong in first class. And she had listened. She listened, her heart sinking, realizing that was the true reason no one stood up for her now. The crew was aware, even Chloe, who had always held her in high regard, hadn't uttered a single word since the captain's announcement. Not even a glance had passed between them since Sarah Mitchell was sent to the back. Leaning her head against the wall, she closed her eyes, desperately trying to block out the low hum of voices in the cabin. The passengers were talking, and she could feel it. The charged silence that hung in the air just before the whispers began, echoing the same painful truth over and over. From row to row, the King family. That's them. The girl asked for water, and she was met with refusal. Did you see how the captain addressed her? They owned the entire airline, and even if she couldn't decipher the words, she felt the weight of his tone. Then, just loud enough for her to hear, someone in first class declared, "That's the one!" She's the one who ignored them. The impact of those words struck her like shards of glass piercing her heart. It wasn't just the crew anymore. Now the passengers were aware. The Whisper network had gained momentum, and her name was now forever linked to a story that would spread far and wide. More than just a flight, this was a moment that people would hold on to forever. They captured it, shared it, tweeted about it, and took screenshots. Her face, her name, her voice. All of it would resonate far beyond this plane. She had earned her reputation for managing tight cabins with a commanding presence, ensuring everything remained in perfect order, flight after flight. But now none of that seemed to matter. The passengers no longer viewed her as the authority. She had become the one pulled from duty, the one who faltered. AK felt the weight of hushed whispers swirling around her like a storm as she sat between the rows of seats. Her throat constricted with anxiety as she envisioned the moment they landed. Would someone be there to greet her at the gate? Security? Human resources? James Carter King himself? The mere thought sent a chill down her spine. She had faced her share of irate passengers, those who were rude, intoxicated, or downright aggressive. She had meticulously filed incident reports, issued warnings, and even called for air marshals when necessary. But this situation was different. James Carter had never raised his voice, never threatened her, never demanded anything from her, and that made it all the more unsettling. The apology he had just witnessed was a painful spectacle, watching her unravel with her own tone, her own choices. In a single message, he had flipped her entire career on its head. She had believed that power stemmed from authority, from the uniform, the rules, the control. But the man in 1A had shattered that illusion. demonstrating that true power didn't need to roar. It simply lingered, waiting for her to stumble right into it, blind to the trap. Her hands began to tremble again, this time with greater intensity. She attempted to conceal them in her lap, but Mia Patel noticed. "You should drink some water," Mia Patel said softly, placing a bottle nearby. Her elbow resting on the armrest, Sarah Mitchell avoided meeting anyone's gaze as she fixated on the bottle of water, the catalyst for everything that had unraveled. She couldn't bring herself to reach for it. It felt like a cruel joke, as if the entire world had turned upside down over something so trivial, so mundane. But deep down, she understood it wasn't just the water, it was her. No longer the esteemed flight attendant she once was, she had become a lesson waiting to be learned. The flight continued in an eerie silence, and from the back of the aircraft, Sarah Mitchell observed the passengers' movements as if they were shrouded in a thick fog, each moment heavy with unspoken tension. As someone stood to stretch or made their way to the restroom, she felt the weight of their gazes sweeping over her. Some lingered just long enough to acknowledge her face, while others offered polite, distant stares. Yet it was unmistakable. This was no longer mere suspicion, it was recognition. The tension that enveloped the cabin was unlike anything she had ever encountered in her entire career. It wasn't loud or disruptive. Rather, it was the opposite, controlled, deliberate, and spreading through the plane like a silent alarm that no one could ignore. Sarah Mitchell sat perfectly still. Still in the jump seat, her back throbbing from the rigid position, her mind a whirlwind of loud, chaotic thoughts. She fixated on the floor beneath her, the scuffed metal that she had walked over 1,000 times, now feeling foreign and unwelcoming. Every inch of the aircraft seemed to radiate a cold hostility. The curtain to the first-class cabin parted briefly, and Chloe emerged, balancing a tray in one hand as she returned from delivering another round of drinks. Their eyes met for just a fleeting moment, long enough for Sarah Mitchell to catch a glimpse of hesitation, pity, but also an undeniable distance in Chloe's gaze. She didn't say a word. She simply turned and vanished behind the curtain once more, leaving an aching silence in her wake. That silence felt like the final blow. Lauren Hayes had always held her in high regard, sought her counsel, and trusted her judgment. But now even Lauren Hayes wouldn't stand by her side. Sarah Mitchell swallowed hard, the dry lump in her throat a painful reminder of her despair, and pressed the heel of her palm against her forehead, feeling the relentless pounding in her head, not from the altitude, but from the weight of it all. Her phone buzzed again, vibrating softly against her leg. She picked it up, her heart racing, desperately hoping for a message from her manager, yearning for any sign that someone had called in to pause the chaos. The escalation hit her like a thunderclap. Someone might have stepped in to defend her, but it wasn't her manager. It was an email with an ominous subject line. Executive Directive Flight 2087 from the Vice President in Flight Operations. The details were chilling. The ground team was instructed to intercept crew member fields upon arrival, with an immediate debrief scheduled. Access badges were to be suspended and uniforms surrendered on site. This incident was under executive review. Sarah Mitchell read it 3 times, each time feeling the weight of the words sink deeper into her mind. Intercept, suspend, surrender. Her ears began to ring, and her heart pounded so fiercely it felt like it might burst from her chest, might rip through her chest. They weren't merely scrutinizing her actions. They were gearing up to cast her out of the airline for good. She had heard whispers of attendants being dismissed, tales exchanged among crew members during layovers or in break rooms. Most of those stories revolved around violence, theft, or drunkenness. Never anything like this. Never someone like her. But this was no ordinary situation. She hadn't just humiliated herself. She had shamed the wrong family. Her eyes rose to the front once more, her gaze fixating on the drawn curtain concealed the first-class cabin from her sight. And though she couldn't see James Carter King, his presence loomed large in her mind. It was palpable in every action that had unfolded, every silence that stretched between them, every decision made without a word of explanation. He hadn't raised his voice, nor had he demanded an apology. He didn't need to. Just one message was enough to shift everything. In that moment, Sarah Mitchell felt an overwhelming sense of insignificance, not just metaphorically, but physically. It was as if the walls of the aircraft were closing in around her, compressing the space that had once felt so familiar, so secure, was now shoving her aside, taking her place. She gazed down at her uniform, the sharp creases, the embroidered name tag, the immaculate appearance she had once cherished. It all felt so hollow now, like a costume she no longer deserved to wear. Memories flooded back to when she first joined the airline, the thrill, the discipline, the pride that had once filled her heart. She recalled how she used to walk through the terminal with her head held high, feeling like she belonged to something truly exceptional. The memory of her first time in first class came rushing back, the nerves that had gripped her as she navigated that new world. Passengers, how careful, how respectful. Over time, that initial nervousness had faded, replaced by a sense of experience and confidence. But oh, how that confidence twisted into something far more sinister: entitlement. She began to believe she had the right to determine who belonged and who didn't, who deserved courtesy and who didn't. Now, the very job she had used to judge others was being cruelly stripped away from her. Her thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a small group of passengers passing by toward the rear lavatory. They didn't speak to her, but their glances spoke volumes. One woman even frowned slightly, and it pierced her heart. The man narrowed his eyes for just a fleeting moment before continuing on. Sarah Mitchell turned her gaze away, the weight of shame crashing down on her like a tidal wave. She had always held on to the belief that her seniority, her years of dedicated service, and her impeccable record would shield her from scrutiny. But now, none of that seemed to matter. Not in the face of a name like King. Not when her actions had been witnessed, felt, and likely recorded by countless eyes. Deep down, even if no one had seen it, even if it had never reached the executive office, she knew she had faltered, not just as a crew member, but as a human being. And just then, the seatbelt sign chimed, cutting through her turmoil. Overhead, a gentle voice from the cockpit resonated through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing." But Sarah Mitchell remained still, a heavy weight settling in her chest. For the first time in her career, she wasn't part of that final round. She wasn't checking trays, securing carts, or reminding passengers to stow their bags. Instead, she was waiting, waiting for the flight to land, waiting for the gate to appear, waiting for her career to come to a close. The soft descent of the aircraft slipped by unnoticed, overshadowed by the turmoil within her. Sarah Mitchell's hands lay frozen in her lap, cold and rigid, her thoughts drifting far away from the cabin and the gentle sway of the plane as it descended through the clouds. Each change in altitude, every subtle turn in the sky, felt utterly insignificant now. She had detached herself from this flight, no longer feeling like a part of it in any meaningful way. She sat there, a passenger in body but not in spirit, isolated from the others, separated from the crew. She found herself trapped in a haunting limbo of silence, watching helplessly as everything around her crumbled, unable to voice her turmoil, unable to intervene. The seat belt light flickered on, a stark reminder of her confinement. The lights blinked on, signaling the final pre-landing announcements. Lauren Hayes moved anxiously up and down the aisle, checking on Rose while Mia Patel secured the galley equipment in silence. Both of them avoided Sarah Mitchell's gaze, and even the passengers seemed to have forgotten her presence. It felt as if she had vanished, no longer a part of this world, no longer someone deserving of attention. The plane tilted gently, descending toward the runway, and Sarah Mitchell fought to steady her breath, struggling to keep her hands from trembling. But her mind was consumed with thoughts of what awaited her, a heavy weight pressing down on her heart. Just beyond the gate, that email had been anything but vague. She was to be intercepted, her badge suspended on sight. They were going to strip her of her uniform right there at the airport, treating her like a problem to be removed rather than a person who had devoted years to the airline. She envisioned security standing by as she stepped off the plane. Perhaps someone from HR, maybe even a representative from King Aviation Holdings. Would James Carter King be there too? No, he wouldn't need to be. He didn't strike her as the kind of man who chased down punishments. He simply handed them out with a cold indifference. She had placed her order once, and it was executed flawlessly, right until the wheels made contact with the runway, delivering a smooth yet definitive thud. The plane decelerated slowly, mirroring the palpable tension that lingered in the cabin. Some passengers clapped politely, while others unbuckled their seatbelts prematurely, eager to escape the confines of the aircraft. Yet no one uttered a word to her. Sarah Mitchell's gaze was fixed on the exit door at the front of the plane, now clearly visible from her seat. The boarding bridge was already being attached, and the airport's familiar gray walls filled the window, but nothing about them felt like home. Just then, the intercom crackled to life once more, and the captain's voice came through, this time with a more formal tone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. The local time is now 3:43 p.m. We kindly ask that you stay seated with your seatbelt securely fastened until the seatbelt sign is turned off. On behalf of the entire crew, we sincerely thank you for choosing to fly with us. The moment the seatbelt light switched off, it resonated like a triumphant drumbeat in Sarah Mitchell's ears. Passengers shifted their bags, and a flurry of activity erupted as people eagerly reached overhead for their luggage. The familiar hum of small talk filled the cabin, conversations about where to eat, who to call, and the timing of the next connection began to weave a tapestry of excitement and anticipation. Time seemed to come to a standstill for Sarah Mitchell. She stood there, not out of choice, but because she felt she had no other option. Her legs trembled beneath her, stiff and unyielding, while her throat ached from the effort of suppressing the torrent of emotions that desperately clawed to be released. Mia Patel approached her slowly, extending a sealed envelope with a gentle, almost hesitant hand. "This just came through," she murmured, her gaze averted. Without uttering a single word, Sarah Mitchell accepted the envelope. Inside lay her termination packet, meticulously prepared, printed and signed by someone wielding a power she could only dream of. A chilling, heavy knot twisted in her stomach as she dared to glance at the contents, the weight of the moment crashing down around her. The message was unmistakable. She was to be removed from the aircraft without any chance for discussion or appeal. Her access badge was deactivated at precisely 3:30 p.m. Mid-flight, she sealed the envelope, a heavy weight pressing down on her, far more burdensome than all her luggage combined. Then, as if the universe was unveiling a climactic scene, the main cabin door swung open. The bridge was ready, and there they stood at the tunnel's end, two airline executives clad in sharp suits. A woman clutched a tablet, while a man in a striking silver tie stood between them, flanked by a third figure in a black uniform, the calm presence of airport security. The moment felt charged with anticipation. The atmosphere was thick with tension as the professional, stone-faced passengers began to disembark one by one. James Carter King rose from his seat, methodically adjusting the cuff of his jacket, and turned toward the exit with his family. He didn't look back, nor did he utter a word to her. There was no need. Sophie Carter cast a fleeting glance in Sarah Mitchell's direction, her expression a complex mix of emotions, neither anger nor smugness, just a profound sense of disappointment. Eleanor followed closely behind, placing a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder, and then James Carter stepped off the plane. Sarah Mitchell's heart raced, pounding so loudly in her chest that it drowned out everything else. She stood there, frozen in the moment. She stood frozen, a figure of stillness as passengers passed by. Some glanced at her, while others turned away, but deep down, every single one recognized her. In an instant, she had transformed from the one who commanded respect to the one under scrutiny. The aisle she had traversed countless times, filled with pride and authority, now stretched before her like an endless chasm, each step feeling heavier than the last. This was not a march toward a new mission. It was a somber journey toward the conclusion of everything she had known. At first, Sarah Mitchell's feet felt glued to the ground, her knees locked in place, and her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. The once familiar path now loomed as a daunting reminder of her fall from grace. The aisle loomed ahead, a long, narrow tunnel teeming with passengers bustling about, retrieving bags, adjusting jackets, and waving at crew members. She used to be part of that final wave, a smiling professional exuding confidence and control. But now she stood there, the only one frozen in place, silent and unseen, no longer a member of the crew. Gripping the back of a seat for support, she fought to quell the tremors in her hands. Her name badge clung to her chest, sharp and metallic. Yet it had lost its significance. It had become nothing more than a hollow decoration, soon to be discarded along with the uniform that had once defined her. At last she found herself at the front of the line, her heart racing as she stepped into the aisle. She walked slowly, her movements stiff, each step a careful effort to maintain her posture. Yet her gaze remained fixed on the ground, avoiding the eyes of those around her. The voices that once filled the air had quieted, replaced by a tense energy, the kind that thrummed with unspoken weight, as if everyone was caught in a moment of uncertainty, unsure whether to act as if everything was normal. Some passengers turned to look at her, while others averted their eyes. A few exchanged whispers behind their hands. No smiles greeted her as she made her way through the first-class section, and the silence seemed to swell, amplifying the gravity of the moment. She could sense every pair of eyes piercing into her back. The same seat she had confidently owned just hours before now felt utterly alien. The air around her felt charged, heavier, as if the very atmosphere was aware of the events that had unfolded and was determined to hold on to the memory. As she approached row 1, she noticed James Carter's family was already gone, yet their seats remained untouched. Blankets neatly folded, headrests perfectly in place. The only evidence they had ever been there was a small bottle of water left in Sophie Carter's cup holder, still unopened, still full. Sarah Mitchell paused for a fleeting moment, her gaze fixated on that bottle, a silent reminder of what had been lost. It felt like a harsh reminder that she had been left behind as she approached the exit. The curtain that typically shielded her from the outside world seemed more fragile than ever. She caught sight of the executives waiting just beyond the aircraft, their faces devoid of any emotion, any hint of compassion. The woman with the tablet was already furiously tapping in details, her fingers a blur, while the man beside her clutched a folder, undoubtedly filled with everything they intended to say. She could only picture the countless termination letters they had handed out before, but this one felt profoundly different. This moment wasn't about theft, misconduct, or any form of criminal behavior. It was about a grave misjudgment. She had gazed upon a family, calm, respectful, and kind, and made the heartbreaking decision that they didn't deserve something as simple as a bottle of water. She had assessed their clothes, their skin, their silence, and concluded they weren't worthy of first-class treatment. Now, because of that fateful choice, she was on the brink of losing everything. As she stepped through the door, a sharp breeze from the jet bridge hit her like a harsh slap, causing her to flinch. Just then, the man in the silver tie stepped forward. "Miss Fields," he said, "you please come with us." She nodded, her silence heavy with unspoken words. What could she possibly say? The hallway reverberated with the sound of her footsteps, each one pulling her further into an unknown fate. Passengers behind her moved on, blissfully unaware of the tension that loomed just moments ahead. Yet those who had witnessed her journey down that aisle would not forget. They would share their whispers, and the story would ripple through the crowd. She cast a glance at the airport walls, once so familiar, now feeling cold and unforgiving. With every step, it was as if she was sinking deeper into a reality from which there was no escape. They guided her toward a side corridor, away from the bustling crowd. Public gates, she was all too familiar with this route. It was reserved for VIPs and urgent security removals, discreet, swift, and silent, much like the way her own downfall had unfolded. They stepped into a small, sterile room, furnished with a table, 2 chairs, and a solitary cabinet. The woman with the tablet handed her a form, the words on it confirming her immediate removal from duty and access to all flight operations. Sarah Mitchell's gaze lingered on the paper, disbelief washing over her. "That's it?" she asked, her voice more strained than she had anticipated. The man in the silver tie remained impassive, his eyes betraying no emotion. "This is not a suspension. This is final." She swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. "I didn't even get a chance to—" He spoke with a calmness that felt almost surreal, repeating that you were recorded not once but twice by passengers and your colleague. The complaint had come straight from King Aviation Holdings. Sarah Mitchell's stomach twisted in knots. "I didn't mean," she began, but the woman cut her off, her voice firm. "It's not about what you meant, it's about what you did." Sarah Mitchell's gaze fell to her trembling hands and she inhaled deeply, her heart racing. With a quiet voice, she asked, "Do I have to surrender my uniform here?" The woman nodded, her expression unyielding. "Yes, there's a changing room down the hall. You'll need to return your badge, wings, and any airline property. You'll be escorted out through a secure exit." Sarah Mitchell's world began to spiral, and in that moment, everything she had painstakingly built, the late-night flights, the cherished holidays, the countless extra shifts, vanished into thin air. It was as if a part of her had been ripped away. With a heavy heart, she took the uniform bag and walked down the hallway, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. The door to the changing room clicked shut behind her, and for the first time since she had joined the airline, she let the tears flow. It wasn't just the loss of her job that brought her to this point, it was the profound realization that washed over her. In the small, cold changing room, Sarah Mitchell stood before a metal bench, her uniform bag clutched tightly in one hand, feeling the weight of her emotions crash down around her. Her fingers felt stiff as the overhead light flickered, a soft hum resonating above her. She gazed at her reflection in the narrow mirror mounted on the wall. Her hair was still neatly pinned back, her shirt impeccably pressed, and her name tag gleamed with a false sense of pride. She looked like a flight attendant, yet the longer she stared, the more she felt that this uniform had never truly belonged to her. With a heavy heart, she sank down onto the bench, her knees trembling as if they had been bearing the weight of her unspoken burdens all along. A shaky breath escaped her lips as she fought to regain control over the storm brewing inside her. A wave of panic surged within her, tightening its grip around her chest, while the oppressive silence in the room consumed her entirely. Her throat constricted, her eyes stung with unshed tears, and before she could rein herself in, a quiet sob slipped out, an intimate sound she had vowed never to reveal. She had always held herself with a dignified grace, never crossing the line into arrogance. She believed it was simply confidence. She was precise, professional, and respected. Yet somewhere along her journey, that confidence had morphed into something sharp and cold, infiltrating her tone, her gaze, and the way she interacted with those she deemed unworthy. And now, in this moment of vulnerability, she found herself utterly alone. Stripped of everything, she began the painful process of unclipping her name tag, the silver plate slipping from her chest and finding its way into the depths of her bag. One by one, she removed the blazer, the blouse, the scarf, and the ID badge that no longer held the power to open any doors. Her wings, those tiny silver pins she had once worn with such pride during training, were held in her hand for what felt like an eternity before she finally released them, allowing them to fall into the bag. The metallic clink they made resonated in the empty room, a haunting sound that felt like the finality of a closing door. She then slipped into the plain clothes she had hastily packed in her carry-on, donning simple jeans that felt like a stark contrast to the weight of what she was leaving behind. And a t-shirt, she felt like a ghost of her former self, unrecognizable to anyone who might have known her. The weight of that uniform lingered on her, as if it had been sewn into her very being for far too long. When she finally emerged from the room, the woman with the tablet stood waiting, her silence heavy with unspoken judgments. She took the uniform bag without a word, checking it off her list with a finality that stung. "You're clear to exit," she stated flatly. Sarah Mitchell nodded, her heart heavy, as two security officers fell in step beside her. They kept their distance, not touching, not aggressive, but their presence was a constant reminder of the reality she was stepping into. Mark the end of everything. They remained silent, and their silence spoke volumes. She trailed behind them down a secluded hallway that led to a side door, away from the bustling terminal, away from the familiar faces of passengers she once greeted with warmth and care. As she walked, memories surged forth unbidden. Her first solo flight, the joy of surprising a young couple with an upgrade on their honeymoon, the satisfaction of soothing a nervous child midair, the heartfelt gratitude from families, elderly passengers, and flight captains. Those small victories made the long hours feel so incredibly worthwhile. And then, as she approached the door, one of the security officers swiped a card to unlock it, and suddenly the outside air rushed in. No crowd, no press, just the biting cold wind and the haunting echo of her own footsteps. She paused at the threshold, glancing back one last time, not at the officers, not at the staff, but at the building behind her. The terminal, the gates, the place where she had poured years of her life. It appeared unchanged, clean, busy and normal, yet to her it would never feel normal again. With a heavy heart, she stepped outside, and the door clicked shut behind her, sealing away a chapter of her life forever. Behind her, the weight of her past life faded away, and in an instant, she was stripped of her identity as a senior crew member. No longer part of the airline, she became just Sarah Mitchell Fields, unemployed, forgotten. The phone in her pocket buzzed once more, and she retrieved it slowly, driven more by habit than by any flicker of hope. Another message from HR. Your final paycheck and severance details will be sent within 72 hours. Access to internal systems has been revoked. Any attempt to re-enter secure areas will be treated as a violation of company policy. She felt a hollow emptiness wash over her. What was left to feel or say? She walked toward the curb, uncertainty weighing heavily on her heart. The usual flow of passengers rushed by, families joyfully loading into taxis, travelers dragging their suitcases, people hurrying into the terminal with boarding passes clutched tightly in hand. It should have been a cacophony of noise and vibrant movement, but for her it all faded into a disorienting blur. Desperately, she pulled out her phone once more, scrolling through her contacts, names that once brought her comfort, familiar voices she believed would always be there for her. She dialed one number, only to be met with voicemail. She tried another, only to hear the disheartening tone of a disconnection, and another met with the cold response of, "Sorry, I can't." In that moment, every door slammed shut behind her, and every connection she believed she had began to freeze over. It wasn't her actions that caused this chill, but rather the identity of the person she had crossed. James Carter King didn't raise his voice. He didn't issue threats or demand a spectacle. He simply observed, absorbing the weight of the situation, and with a single, devastating text, he ensured that her wings would never soar again. Sarah Mitchell sank down onto the unforgiving edge of a concrete planter outside the terminal, the harsh surface biting into her legs. She gazed out at the parking lot, watching the lines of cars and the relentless flow of life continuing on, indifferent to her plight. For the very first time in her life, she found herself utterly lost, with no destination in sight, no gate to rush to, no flight to catch, and no passengers to attend to. She was not just alone. She felt as if she had been completely erased from existence. Sarah Mitchell sat on the cold edge of the concrete planter, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as the wind howled through the airport's drop-off zone. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, haunting shadows across the pavement, but she hardly registered it. Around her, life surged on. Travelers moved with determination, families embraced in joyful reunions, couples exchanged bittersweet farewells, and drivers busily loaded bags into waiting cars. Open trunks, a girl nearby laughed as she dashed into the arms of someone waiting at the curb. The sound felt distant, as if it were coming from behind a thick wall, echoing in a world that no longer felt real to Sarah Mitchell. Not anymore. She had always believed the airport was hers in some profound way. Her second home, her battlefield, her stage. She knew its corridors, its smells, the rhythm of its announcements. It was where she had built her reputation, shaped her identity, and earned the respect of her peers. People had known her name. New crew members had looked up to her, and supervisors had placed their trust in her. She was left to navigate the turmoil of difficult flights. Yet now she found herself unable to step back inside. With a trembling hand, she reached for her phone once more. Not out of lingering hope, but because the habit still clung to her fingers. As she opened the crew messaging app, desperation washed over her when she discovered her access had been revoked. A message flashed before her eyes. User not found. Just 2 words, but they pierced her heart, severing her ties to a world she had cherished for so long. In that moment, she realized she no longer existed in that realm. She turned to her airline email next, only to find herself logged out permanently. With a heavy heart, she scrolled through her contacts list, passing by countless names of cabin leaders, scheduling officers, and fellow flight crew, each one a reminder of what she had lost. Coordinators, the cherished souls she had broken bread with during layovers, those she had selflessly covered shifts for, trained, and mentored. They had stood shoulder to shoulder through turbulence and emergencies, yet now even their names felt like distant echoes, like strangers in her heart. Her thumb lingered over a contact she had saved long ago. Jessica Brooks, a former flight partner who had soared into a management role. They had shared countless long overnight flights, weaving together moments of gossip, laughter, and tears. Jessica Brooks had once said, "If you're ever in trouble, call me before anyone else." With a mix of hope and longing, Sarah Mitchell tapped the name, and the phone rang once, then fell silent. Straight to voicemail, she ended the call before leaving a message. What could she possibly say? "I never intended to disrespect them. I had no idea who they were." It would feel so empty, so weak and insincere. Because deep down, Sarah Mitchell understood that it wasn't really about their identity, it was about her own choices. The truth was painfully ugly. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't hurled insults, hadn't broken any written rules. Yet her actions, the icy tone, the dismissive glance, the refusal to extend even a basic courtesy, had screamed louder than any words of offense ever could. Gazed at that family and, without a moment's pause, concluded that they were unworthy of first class. Not due to any disruptive behavior or demands, but because of something far more insidious, a judgment, an assumption. That quiet, unspoken offense had shattered her career, echoing louder than any scandal she could have ever envisioned. As the terminal door swung open once more, a wave of new passengers flooded in, fresh from their arrivals. Among them, Sarah Mitchell spotted Chloe, the younger attendant, striding with determination, wheeling her cart forward. As her bag moved toward the employee's shuttle pickup, Lauren Hayes caught sight of Sarah Mitchell. Their eyes locked for a fleeting moment, and Sarah Mitchell's heart soared with hope. Just for an instant. Perhaps Lauren Hayes would stop. Perhaps she would say something, anything to bridge the chasm that had formed between them. But instead, Lauren Hayes merely paused, offering a slight nod before continuing on her way. That brief, quiet acknowledgement felt more painful than a slap. It conveyed everything. "I see you. I know what you did. And while I'm not angry, I'm not surprised either. I just can't stand beside you anymore." Sarah Mitchell's gaze fell to the ground, her vision blurring with tears. She wasn't just losing her job. She was being cast out of a world, the very world she had poured her heart into. Every holiday missed, every overnight shift, every birthday spent alone in a sterile hotel room, clad in her uniform, gone. She opened her rideshare app, but her gaze lingered on the screen, lost in thought. Where was she even headed? Her apartment felt like a world away, and her suitcase was already en route to lost luggage. A cruel fate for those let go. HR might send it if they felt generous, but more likely she'd be summoned to retrieve it next week, under watchful eyes. She didn't want to go home. She didn't want to be anywhere at all. Just then her phone buzzed, a new notification breaking through her haze. A message from an unknown number appeared and it read, "Sometimes silence says more than anger." Her breath hitched in her throat. James Carter King. Just the initials, but she recognized the truth immediately. There was no mistake. He hadn't forgotten her. He hadn't turned his back on what transpired. Instead, he had patiently observed, biding his time, and then he acted. He didn't raise his voice, didn't seek revenge, didn't expose her flaws to the world. No, he allowed her to unravel on her own. And now, even after everything that had transpired, he left her with one final haunting reminder of why it all happened. Not out of a thirst for power, not out of a desire for revenge, but because of people like him, those who possess true strength. Power didn't have to obliterate anyone. It merely needed to reflect the truth, and Sarah Mitchell found herself unable to bear the sight of her own image any longer. She gazed at the message for what seemed like an eternity, her thumb suspended above the screen, paralyzed, her whole being locked in place. The words weren't menacing, nor were they harsh. They were straightforward, calculated, just like everything else he had orchestrated. Yet that simplicity struck her with even greater force. She had braced herself for an onslaught, something loud, furious, and theatrical. But that was never how James Carter King played his game. He didn't raise his voice, nor did he belittle her. He simply ensured that the damage was irrevocable. In doing so, he sent a chilling message, not to inflict more pain, but to ensure she grasped the gravity of the situation. Sarah Mitchell slowly lowered the phone into her lap, her eyes vacant, the wind tugging at her sleeves like a whisper of despair. She found herself drifting back to the moment it all began. Not when the water was denied, but even earlier, when the family boarded. She remembered casting a fleeting glance at them, forming her first quiet assumption that they were out of place, that they didn't belong in the setting, that they were insignificant. That single thought lingered, heavy with meaning. That moment had cracked open the door to a world of realization, illuminating everything that followed. Her tone, her posture, her icy demeanor. They had seen it all, of course, not because she had lashed out or hurled insults, nor because she had denied them something significant, but because those who have endured a lifetime of subtle dismissals are acutely aware of every nuance. The tight smile, the forced politeness, the absence of simple courtesies, the unspoken belief that they had to earn their place. Yet they remained calm and composed, even as she attempted to belittle them. That was what gnawed at her now, more than the loss of her job. More than the public shame, they had no need to confront her because deep down, they already understood their true selves. James Carter didn't flaunt his wealth, Eleanor didn't assert her authority, and the children remained silent, offering her every opportunity to look beyond her prejudices. Yet she failed to seize it. Now she found herself outside the airport, feeling exiled, discarded, and forgotten by the very company she once believed she had a hand in shaping. Meanwhile, that same family, the one she had tried so hard to undermine, was likely gliding through life in a chauffeur-driven car, calm and untroubled, on their way to a private terminal or a luxurious penthouse, completely unfazed by her downfall. Her stomach twisted in a painful knot, a hollow sickness settling deep within her. It wasn't jealousy or anger that consumed her. It was something far more unsettling: recognition. She had constructed her entire career on the belief that she was fair, that she treated every passenger with unwavering professionalism. But now, with everything stripped away, the truth was painfully clear. She had only shown respect to those she deemed worthy, extending kindness only when it suited her. When someone didn't fit her narrow view of wealth, importance, or influence, she made them wait, made them feel small. And deep down, she knew that had always been so deeply wrong. No company policy could justify it, and no years of service could erase the pain. She blinked hard, battling another wave of tears, but they fell anyway, quiet, unwanted, and steady. Turning her face away from the crowd, she felt the weight of shame settle in her chest like a heavy, cold block of cement. Across the street, a limo glided into the private transport lane, a sleek black vehicle gleaming like a mirror. Two suited drivers emerged, one opening the back door while the other spoke into a headset. The scene was so smooth, so polished, yet it felt like a stark contrast to her turmoil. It felt surreal, almost like a dream. Then the rear door swung open, and James Carter stepped out first. Even from afar, his presence was undeniable. Shoulders squared, chin slightly raised, exuding a quiet strength that seemed innate. Behind him, Eleanor appeared, her scarf dancing softly in the breeze. She didn't glance around, didn't falter for a moment. The children trailed behind her, composed and silent. Sarah Mitchell instinctively recoiled behind the planter, her heart racing. She hadn't anticipated seeing them again. Not this soon, not so close. But there they were, and the rush of emotions was overwhelming. Not a single one of them glanced her way. Their silence screamed louder than any words could. As they entered the nearby VIP terminal, Sarah Mitchell felt paralyzed, half concealed behind the stone planter. In her ordinary clothes, she was unrecognizable, a ghost among the living. No one would ever suspect that she was the one who had tried to diminish that family. nor would they realize that she had just lost everything because of it. But deep down, she carried that burden, a weight heavier than any punishment they could have inflicted. She lingered there, trapped in her own despair. After the limo had pulled away, long after the terminal doors had closed, and long after her phone battery had slipped into the ominous red, she felt the weight of inevitability pressing down on her. She knew she would have to rise from this moment, to call a cab, to find a new place to stay, to start over somehow. But not yet. Right now she was lost in a whirlwind of confusion, grappling with the painful realization of how she had transformed into the very person she had vowed never to become. Not cruel, not hateful, just carelessly adrift, and that carelessness had cost her everything. The sky above the airport deepened into a dull gray as dusk settled in, casting a somber shadow that mirrored her heartache. The terminal lights flickered softly, casting a gentle glow against the deepening twilight. Sarah Mitchell stood still on the concrete edge, a solitary figure amidst the rush of travelers who flowed by her like a vibrant river of color and sound. Her legs felt heavy and numb, a testament to the time that had slipped away. Her phone lay silent, its battery long depleted, severing her ties to the world. No messages, no calls, just an overwhelming void of silence. She hadn't shifted in over an hour, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the outline of her empty badge pouch. The symbols of her identity, the wings, the name tag, the uniform, were all gone, zipped away, leaving her feeling lost and adrift. Tucked away in a corporate bag, lost in some nameless bin within the HR office, was her identity. She had always envisioned her departure from aviation filled with warmth, a farewell party, a retirement cake, perhaps even a heartfelt round of applause from a grateful crew. Instead, it had unfolded in stark contrast. A cold, sterile hallway, a mere signature on a form, and a message from a man who never raised his voice, but irrevocably altered her entire future with just one sentence. Sarah Mitchell slowly rose, her knees stiff, her back aching, her bones heavy with the crushing weight of shame. The terminal behind her loomed, a stark reminder of what once was. The bustling scene was alive with energy, filled with people on the move, planes soaring into the sky, uniforms gliding with determination, schedules being honored. Smiles were shared, but for her everything felt distant. As she made her way to the curb, dragging her empty carry-on behind her, she caught sight of a young flight attendant, perhaps in her early 20s, with bright eyes and freshly pinned wings on her blazer. The girl was laughing into her phone, her voice bubbling with joy and pride. Sarah Mitchell didn't stop to engage. She remained silent, yet a wave of nostalgia washed over her. She remembered all too well the feeling of pride, the sense of belonging, the unwavering belief that once filled her heart. That if you put in the effort, adhered to the guidelines, and held your head high, you would find protection. She had indeed followed those guidelines, yet she overlooked the most crucial one. Respect isn't merely a favor. It's a solemn duty. It's not something reserved for the powerful, the affluent, or those who fit a certain image. It is a fundamental right owed to every individual, every name, every face. Because the instant you decide that someone is unworthy of respect, you not only let them down, but you also betray yourself. And sometimes that betrayal is irreparable. Sarah Mitchell reached the far curb where taxis flowed in and out, a driver stepping out to open the door for her, his silence heavy with unspoken questions. "Where to?" he asked, but she hesitated, uncertainty washing over her. There was no next job waiting, no meeting to attend, no uniform to don again. Just the endless road stretching ahead and the profound silence enveloping her. "Just drive," she whispered, her voice barely breaking the stillness as she climbed into the back seat. The door clicked shut and the cab pulled away, leaving the vibrant airport lights flickering against the night sky. Yet inside her, a deep darkness had already settled, an echo of what once was. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to join our community by subscribing to the channel and immerse yourself in more inspiring stories like this one that truly resonate. The story of Sarah Mitchell, a flight attendant who lost her career after refusing to serve water to the King family, reveals a profound life lesson. Respect is a universal obligation, not a selective privilege. Sarah's downfall stems from her unconscious bias, judging the family's worth based on assumptions rather than their inherent dignity. Her disdain, though subtle, has serious consequences, emphasizing that true power lies in humility and fairness, not authority or status. In today's fast-paced American culture, where snap judgments often govern interactions, whether in the workplace, social settings, or online, this lesson is profound. Bias, even when unintentional, can alienate others and erode trust. The story highlights the importance of treating everyone with equal respect, regardless of appearance, background, or perceived status. In a diverse society where inclusivity is fundamental, ignoring this principle can lead to personal and professional ruin, as it did for Sarah. Practice mindfulness in your everyday interactions. Pause before responding to others, especially strangers, and challenge preconceived notions. In customer service, healthcare, or any people-facing role, prioritize empathy over efficiency. Small acts of kindness, like offering a glass of water, can affirm someone's humanity. In the digital age, where anonymity fosters harsh judgments, choose words that uplift rather than demean. By making respect a non-negotiable value, we foster stronger communities and avoid regret over missed opportunities for connection. Sarah's story is a cautionary tale. Respect is not just a policy, it is a reflection of character, shaping our legacy in every encounter.